Thank you, Sandesh. Can you all hear me? Loud and clear? Okay, good morning. Thanks, Sandesh. Sandesh has done a fantastic job in putting it together along with the team. Janice, April, where are you? Without you, this wouldn't be possible at all. And thank you for really doing a phenomenal job. And we're excited about the program. Clearly, I think this is a very unique opportunity for us to come together for the greater good of the community, of our patients, right? That's what we strive to do every day, to make sure that if I was a patient today or tomorrow, yes, I would like to know, earlier to detect the disease and then hopefully make an impact with therapeutic strategies and then really have a good outcome. So we're all in the same boat. And to that end, I believe that today is a very important day. And I'm really honored and excited to have great speakers, great agenda, great moderators. So then let's start off with the moderator introduction. Let's go with Dr. Michael Castro. Please, when I call you, please call upon you, come to the stage. Michael Castro is a great friend of mine. I've known him for 25 years. I've been in the Valley here for almost 33 years. I've known him as long as he's been here, and he's one of the finest internal medicine practicing doctor, both clinical as well as research and in teaching. He's also a gerontologist. He's done multiple research projects, and more recently, he's done some research with me utilizing technology to actually make a better patient outcome utilizing virtual reality and immersive technology, and he was the principal investigator. We just presented at the Cardiometabolic Health Congress in Boston that Michael presented recently. So he's done some great work, and so honored to have him here. He's also the Associate Program Director for Internal Medicine Program at Abrazo, and such an honor to have you here, Michael. Welcome. And let's, Janice, where are you? Janice Guzman, I'd like to welcome another co-moderator. Janice is again, a gerontological nurse practitioner based in Tucson. She told me that she's based in Tucson, and I heard she's baked in Tucson. I said, okay, we're all baked somewhere or the other, but truly, she's an amazing nurse practitioner who's doing some good work, both in clinical setting, as well as doing some very fascinating research. She's actually doing something interesting. She's doing research in remote patient monitoring in veteran population in Tucson at the VA in heart failure. So it's going to be something very different and unique, and see whether we can actually make a better impact on patient outcomes. So again, welcome, Janice, and again, thank you all for coming. I'm going to now hand over to Sandesh to introduce George, and then we'll kick off the meeting. Thank you all for coming.
Okay, I hope you have a large glass of tea. I have 32 pages of Dr. Post's resume to cover. But some of the brief highlights are Dr. George Post is a Regents Professor and Dell Webb Chair in Health Innovations, Chief Scientist of the Complex Adaptive Systems Initiative. From 2003 to 2009, he built the Biodesign Institute at ASU. And since January 21, he assumed leadership of the Institute for Future Health, a joint venture of ASU and U of A. And he's my boss. From 1992 to 1999, he was the Chief Science and Technology Officer at SmithKline Beecham, now GlaxoSmithKline. And he was also awarded the rank of Commander of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II for contributions to research and international security. I think the thing I most admire about George actually is his ability to tell great stories and to integrate knowledge from so many disciplines. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, George, Commander.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to come on a Saturday. And I hope what we will see emerge throughout this meeting is not only the conceptual framework for the evolving framework for treating this disease, but a greater recognition of this disease and the impact for patients, but a full recognition, very much consistent with my role as director of the Institute for Future Health, was building very large-scale programs and collaboration between institutions. And I say that as the only non-cardiologist in the session, and since the clicker doesn't work, I'm going to have to ad-lib here for some reason, but it's completely dead. Where's the sensor? Okay, great, thank you. Still not working. Anyway, let me, the easiest thing is to get notes and we will ad-lib. So clearly there are going to be a number of consistent themes throughout this meeting, but we obviously start with the fact that this is a disease which is under-recognized and therefore under-treated. Prevalence is clearly higher than has been recognized hitherto. As a consequence of that, there's often an unacceptably long interval between the time a patient first presents and a definitive diagnosis occurs, and in that interval, a substantial utilization of essentially futile cost before that diagnosis occurs. The prognosis is unfortunately a dire one, as this audience certainly knows. More recently, we've of course seen the option for new therapeutics, whether it be for cardiomyopathy or polyneuropathy. But by definition, as in most disease states, earlier detection actually facilitates effective outcomes. We're having some problems here. And I think just one of the sort of simple vignette to show the interest in this subject is simply just the rapid growth in both publications and the references specifically in the last few years to therapeutic intervention. Data is, however, still fragmented. That's not unique in medicine, but certainly the data from Arizona against those particular parameters is still a limited data set. And to the third bullet there, we have very limited data on our Hispanic population and certainly virtually no information on our Native American populations. And still most of the data is coming from highly specialized centers such as the ones that you all work in. The clear issue has been, most importantly, a transition from invasive endomyocardial biopsy to scintigraphic imaging. But at the same time, with the increased prevalence of this disease, who do you actually then refer to a scintigraphic workup? And we've seen the evolution of a series of risk scores evolving any one of a number of the parameters which are listed there put together. And with the reach of machine learning and artificial intelligence into many domains of medicine now, applying those types of deep learning tools to these multi-parameters does actually help in a much more important selection. But at the same time, there's a need to still validate these evolving test scores, risk scores across the spectrum of the disease. Obviously, one goal certainly shared by this audience is to increase the recognition and awareness beyond the specialized amyloid centers. There is a paucity of biomarkers, which is probably the biggest single area of research opportunity, particularly if you could migrate biomarker discovery into easily sampled biospecimens such as blood and urine, because that would then clearly expand the opportunity to do cost-effective screening for earlier detection. At the same time, rigorous diagnostic biomarker capabilities would, if you had those that could also prognose and predict any progression from polyneuropathy to cardiomyopathy, biomarkers, as in other areas of medicine, to monitor therapeutic efficacy, disease progression monitoring, and the low-cost issue permitting you to screen asymptomatic hereditary variant ATTR cohorts for late-onset disease due to the incomplete penetrance of variants in different cohorts. We're still having problems here, April. Could someone else advance the slides for me? Won't do it off the keyboard either. Then, of course, in the treatment domain, there is still the unresolved issue is efficacy greater for the thyretin stabilizers versus the silencers. proposals with regard to the use of combination therapeutics, and this, of course, applies in so many areas. Now, one in which I spend a great deal of time is immunotherapy in cancer, where combination therapies are increasingly the norm, but at the same time, what sequence do you give those agents? What is the unit dose titration? And then the point which is going to come up in a moment, well known to this audience, is the fact that the extravagantly high cost of the agents in this arena is certainly problematic. Another issue which we will eventually wrestle with is, are the thresholds for irreversible progression, which would predict lack of RX efficacy? And that leads, of course, to the grand challenge question of, is this cardiomyopathy reversible? Will that actually then require a new category of myofibril clearance agents? Next slide, please. So, of course, this is the issue I touched on a moment ago. The high annual cost of approved therapeutics ranges from essentially $250,000 to $500,000. And if you look at the studies by ICER and others in the cost effectiveness domain, this would require an extravagant reduction in extravagant cost, probably of the order of 85 to 90%. To actually bring you into the quality adjusted segment of 50 to 150,000 per cost effective quality threshold. Next slide, please. And then, of course, if you go and look at the pipeline that is evolving in this arena, whether it be for neuropathy, cardiomyopathy, or directly attaching the aberrant TTR, this is a burgeoning pipeline, and one has to then begin to ask the question of what will be the cost effectiveness of these new therapeutic regimens. Next slide. And of course, will we in what time frame see a shift in the therapeutic paradigm in this disease that move him from lifelong therapy, which is the dilemma today? And is this a bright star on the horizon, which is using gene editing technology, the work that Intellia and Regeneron are doing with the drug that's listed there? They've demonstrated initial efficacy in the hereditary polyneuropathy situation, and now expanding into cardiomyopathy. Certainly extrapolating from the studies in polymyopathy and neuropathy, there is indeed a sustained knockdown of TTR expression for 6 to 12 months, but the question of how that translates to clinical benefit remains to be seen. And of course, in any gene therapy framework, it is the threshold of transduction efficiency into your target cell population, in this case the hepatocyte, that will determine all. And the dilemma which the FDA is always struggling with is in this emergent arena, not just for amyloidosis, but all gene therapy, is what are the off-target effects, because they, in many instances, may be often delayed. So there's likely to be the cost of post-approval studies. Next slide, please. But this is just a summary of themes which are well known to this audience. What I want to do is put it in the context of trying to create this framework for a pan-Arizona network, because I think there are many elements of what you are facing in this that reflect the same elements that are shaping biomedical R&D and healthcare delivery at large. Next slide. And that is the fact that we have reflected in my own gray hair, an increasingly aged population, chronic comorbidities in that population, economically unsustainable treatment regimens, and major unmet clinical and social needs as a consequence of that. That has to be balanced against what the general public and the politicians think will be an inexorable tsunami of new innovations coming forward at ever lower cost, with better clinical outcomes and quality of life. But the collision course between those two parameters is going to be with us for some time. And then, of course, in the era of precision medicine, we now have multi-omic stratification of diseases into increasingly small cohorts of patients with different underlying molecular teleologies. And of course, that has been the price driver, that if you've only got a small patient cohort, the recovery of your R&D costs, which can be anywhere between 500 million and $1 billion plus, that drives this distortive element of market failure. And the drugs of this category march under the orphan drug status, as you know, but the threshold for that is 200,000 patients. So if indeed the prevalence of ATTR neuropathies and cardiomyopathy is in fact going to quickly move beyond 200,000 patients, then that will have to be re-examined. And what will that mean then for the price structure and people's willingness to come in? And in this, of course, if you are subsetting patients on the basis of molecular stratification, you also need a companion diagnostic. So that adds further to the equation. Next slide. And so this, of course, then leads to something, again, which this audience lives with the entire time. We're living in an environment of escalating scientific and clinical complexity. And in short, how do each of us stay current with our responsibilities? It's the pace and diversity of innovation, new concepts, new technologies, and an overwhelming burgeoning of large-scale data. And the world in which I live is basically a fusion of three previously separate domains, namely medicine with engineering and computing. And then we're seeing new combination products, diagnostics, therapeutics, devices, and data algorithms coming together. And at the same time, with the pervasive and rapid acceleration of machine learning and AI technologies in all areas of medicine, regulatory validation through the FDA, so-called software as medical device, will become an increasingly challenging issue. And then back again to price, increasingly, and if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, it's very clear that the FDA's mandate, which is currently limited to safety and efficacy, is going to extend to value. And so with or without ICER's insertion into the equation, CMS will become an equally potent blunt weapon in this debate. Next slide. And so it's what I colloquially refer to as the S4 to M4 paradigm shift, particularly if you're in academia. For the most part, academia is still trapped in single scientific disciplines or single clinical specialities, but increasingly the problems we wrestle with are multidisciplinary and multi-speciality, often conducted in single institutions, whereas the scale and sophistication of what's required requires multi-institutional collaborations. Often, if one is dependent upon the federal purse, the resources are subcritical, and at the same time, you've then got to manage the scale of these much larger enterprises, and it is still frustratingly slow to translate innovation into patient benefit, and we have to do better. Next slide. And so another way of putting that is, in fact, silos subvert solutions. And so the whole métier for the institute, which I run and many others around the country, is actually making this transition from the S4 to the M4. Next slide. And so a quick vignette about Arizona for those of you who don't live here. We're the third fastest growing state in the nation. Metro Phoenix is now overtaken Philadelphia and Houston as the fifth largest urban complex in the country. We have unique demographics. Almost a quarter of our population is Hispanic. We have the largest population of Native American tribes in the country, constitute 5.6% of our population. An intriguing feature is that in this 5.5 million metroplex, healthcare is largely provided by only 7 major healthcare providers, whereas if you compare that with Philadelphia or Houston, you're talking about 35 to 40 major healthcare providers. So the question of herding cats in those situations is a lot more complex than trying to get 7 major provider organizations to work together in Arizona. And there has been very rapid growth in both universities, ASU, U of A, and NAU, with now $1.5 billion in annual grant revenues. Next slide. And as a consequence of that, we've had a momentum in the last few years to do exactly what we're trying to do here. These are consortia which have been established in the last 2 to 3 years by bringing everyone together across Arizona. They're listed there. The topics are self-explanatory, but it's a momentum. And so it is the question of what we've done here in these other consortia which have been built over the last 2 to 3 years. The penultimate one, of course, there was catalyzed by COVID, but nonetheless, it is this S4 to M4 transition. Next slide. And so if one were to define theoretically what one would like to see in this network is the capability to build a substantial biobank, a longitudinal registry of patients, ethnic diversity in that patient group, different stages, multi-organ amyloidosis for sampling, both cardiac and non-cardiac, and as mentioned earlier, the ability to migrate to much more minimally invasive, low-cost biospecimens. At the same time, in the ever-increasing world of omics, the last time I checked, there were 400 omics suffixes attached, but certainly whole exome, whole transcriptome sequencing is now quite routine. There are people in this audience who have published on proteomics. Circulating microvesicles or exosomes are becoming an intriguing analyte class and have been shown to be altered in ATTR. And then, of course, what is the nature of the structural biology that gives rise to the altered protein folding, then a whole series of analytical platforms which are needed to support that. And in the end, you get to data, high performance data computing. ASU is now in the top 100 fastest computers, supercomputers in the country. We're one of only 6 worldwide Dell high performance computing capabilities that puts us in the top 10 of any university high-performance computing capability. And as we said when we talked about multi-parameter risk scores, bringing together all this complex phenotypic data, yet alone the multi-omic data, is going to require that type of analytical framework. And last but not least is this, again, back to this issue of pharmacoeconomic analysis. Next slide. And so the idea would be that the people in this audience could in fact be the catalyst to begin to build this statewide network of capabilities in the detection and treatment of ATTR amyloidosis. We need to generate much more sophisticated epidemiological data in the state of Arizona, analyze what are the barriers and the promoters to implement evidence-based care, apologies for the type, evidence-based practice. And at the same time, clearly we're not an island. We would like to see Arizona migrate into a national framework as a leading enterprise within this important area of biomedicine. Next slide. And so just my disclosures, and the most important thing is if any of you want access to the slides, it's also a prompt to remind you that the slides from everyone's presentations are available, but I hope at least with this superficial surf across a large landscape, you've at least got a sense of what we hope will be an aspirational framework for Sandesh and his colleagues in helping us build this. So again, thank you so much for taking time from your schedules on a Saturday, and I'm looking forward to a stimulating and productive symposium. Thank you.